I'm sure you're just as concerned about the future of climate change like I am, but that doesn't mean you have to suffer from it. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to my channel. I'm Aman Luthra, and today I'm gonna take you around this small little lake right here in the snow. Now, you may think that all hope is lost with climate change, but that doesn't mean that your fate has to be if you take the right steps. Whether we like it or not, climate change is already here, and it's already affecting dozens of people around the world, and it's only a matter of time before that includes all of us, just like you and me. And even though we aren't really dealing with a crisis right now, I think it's only a matter of time before one happens, unfortunately. But instead of giving you a bunch of disturbing facts and ruining your mood, I want to tell you that there's a lot of things that you can do to prepare for it. If you're an outdoorsy person like me, you'll know that the three most important things for survival are food, water, and shelter. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. We're going to talk about how you can have access to all three of these resources when there are shortages of them, and when extreme weather events are happening that we don't know is gonna happen. And you may not necessarily like what I'm about to tell you, but in a crisis, we're not gonna have all the luxuries that we have right now. So we have to make the most out of the situation. So let's start out with food. Comes to having food in a climate crisis, the general rule is that you're going to have to grow your own crops. And the reason being is because in a crisis there's probably going to be shortages of food because of increasing demand, increasing population, and most of all, a shortage of supply. On the other hand, if you learn how to grow your own crops, you will have an extra layer of food security that is going to be vital for you. That means it will be ideal for you to live somewhere that you have enough space to grow your own crops. So what food should we focus on growing? Well, the most reliable crops for survival will be things like nuts, grains, legumes, vegetables, and fruits. And if you notice, they are all plant-based foods, which makes sense because it takes a lot more resources, energy, and time to create animal-based products. And not only are these plant-based foods easy to grow, but they also require the least amount of work and water while being resistant to pests and weather. And you can grow large bunches of them at a time so that they last in the winter when you cannot grow as many crops. And finally, these are the kind of crops that will provide you with just about all the essential nutrients that you need. There's protein in the legumes, there's carbs in the grains, and there are plenty of healthy fats in the nuts. So again, the major crops that we should be focusing on are nuts, grains, legumes, vegetables, and fruits. So with that said, there are two things that you can do right now to help you prepare. And the first one is to start adopting a plant-based diet. And I'm certainly not trying to pressure or force you to become vegan or vegetarian just because I'm vegan. But you should be mindful that in a crisis, it's going to be harder and harder to get access to food. So by sticking to a plant-based diet, you'll have more access to food because growing animal-based products takes a lot more time, energy, and resources. There's a ton of recipes out there on YouTube, Pinterest, and everywhere else that have plenty of plant-based recipes that are healthy, tasty, and super easy to make. I have some videos on this channel which can help you get started with a plant-based diet, which I'll include right up here in the corner, so go check them out. Secondly, I would recommend learning how to garden. You don't need a big open space to start gardening. You can easily start by growing your own house plants in tiny pots. By growing your own houseplants, you'll learn how often to water them, how to change the soil, how much sunlight they need, and so many other factors that will be important to know when you start working in a bigger garden. And plus, there's a lot of mental health benefits that come with growing houseplants. Because you are caring for something that has life, it improves your happiness, your mood, your productivity, and so much more. So consider making a trip to a garden center at Lowe's, Home Depot, or any other store, and you can find small plants for less than $10. So by adopting a plant-based diet and learning how to garden, you can take the initial baby steps of learning how to grow your own food during a crisis. Okay, now let's talk about this stuff right here, which is water. So having food is very important during a crisis, but having water is even more important. And when it comes to having water in a crisis, the most important thing that you should know is that we need to collect as much water as possible, because you never know when there might be a shortage. That is why I would highly recommend that you invest in some storage tanks. These will allow you to have a water supply that lasts several days when it becomes hard to find water. And during a crisis, there are a few ways that you can collect water. The first is to catch rainwater. And with climate change, precipitation rates are only going to increase depending on where you live. So you can have some sort of collection system that fills into your storage tanks. And another thing you can do is collect water from a nearby river or lake. Now let me just tell you that flowing water will always be a lot cleaner than still water, so a river or a stream is definitely a better idea than a lake. But during a crisis, you may not want to be as picky. And a third option is to build a well that collects groundwater. Now this isn't my ideal recommendation because groundwater supplies change all the time and you would have to maintain the well, but it's not out of the question. There's a lot more ways for you to collect water, but those are the three main methods that I think are practical. And after you've collected your water, the next step is to clean it, of course. No matter what way you clean your water, I would highly recommend that you use some sort of filter. The reason being is that it will get rid of any big particles that other cleaning methods will not be able to do as easily. And that includes things like dust, dirt, and other things that you cannot see. And as a plus, most filters out there will also be able to get rid of viruses and bacteria as the water goes through them. So using a filter is definitely my ideal recommendation. And another way you can clean your water is to boil it. And that will get rid of about all the bacteria and viruses in it. And it takes out a lot of unpleasant smells and tastes. But the downside is that you need a big energy source to boil the water, and it won't be able to get rid of the larger particles that I mentioned before. However, you could take this a step further by evaporating your water and then condensing it, which would give you clean water, but that also takes a lot of energy. So boiling water is certainly an option, but just keep in mind that you're going to need a lot of fuel or some other energy source to do it. There's a lot of other ways to clean your water, like using UV light, using chemicals, and so on. But in my opinion, I think boiling water or using a filter are the most practical choices. And finally, the last tip that I have for you is to minimize your water consumption as much as possible. And there are two ways to go about this. The first way to lower our water consumption is to really minimize the amount of products that we consume. The amount of water that it takes to make your gadgets, your clothes, your appliances, and other products is way higher than the amount of water that you actually use for drinking, showering, and so on. And when it comes to products, the things that we can avoid buying which take up a lot of water are electronics, cotton clothes, and plastics. If you want to learn more about the impacts of consumerism, I have a video which you can watch right up here, so go check that out. And finally, we need to talk about reducing the amount of water that you actually use on a daily basis. The largest water consumer in your house is the toilet. So during a climate crisis, you may have to do something unconventional, which is only using the toilet for number 2. For number 1, you're probably going to have to go outside. I know it doesn't sound normal, but when it comes to saving water in a crisis, going outside into the woods for number 1 will save you gallons of water every day. And additionally, try taking shorter showers. I know it sounds obvious, but a lot of us spend 10, 20, or even 30 minutes in the shower. And not only will a short shower save you water and energy, but it's also healthier for your hair and skin because it ends up less dry. And if you want to take it a step further, take a short and cold shower. And I know that doesn't sound fun, and it's definitely not, but hear me out. Your skin and hair will look and feel a lot better when you're out of the water. And by not heating up the water, you'll be able to save energy too, which is also very important during a crisis. So remember, saving, collecting, and cleaning your water is going to be super important during a crisis. So even though there may be water shortages in the future, you don't have to worry about it. that we've talked about food and water, the last major item to consider is your shelter. And as you'd expect during a crisis, a shelter is going to be absolutely everything, especially when there are events going on around you like fires, droughts, and floods. So it may not make sense to stay in the home you're in right now when these events are happening around you. So the first major consideration with shelter is location. In a crisis, you should live in a place that has minimal disasters going on around you. And realistically, there won't be a place that is free from all disasters, but here are some general guidelines. First of all, stay away from the coastlines. Climate change means that sea level is going to be rising, and if you live in a coastal city like Miami, there's unfortunately no guarantee that the streets will always stay above the water. Moving inland from the oceans is going to be really important. Speaking of which, you should make sure that there are reliable water sources nearby, like a lake or a river. We talked about how collecting water is very important during a crisis, so having a never-ending supply of water will be a huge blessing for you. Number 2, stay away from dry areas. If you live in the western US, this is going to be very important because of wildfires. And realistically, it's going to be hard to live somewhere that is completely drought-free. But again, the goal is to minimize the risk, so staying away from deserts and dry areas will help to avoid the damage of fires and heat waves. Number 3, move north. A general rule to remember is that the further south that you are, the higher the risk of the natural disaster, especially heat waves. And one of the best theoretical locations in the US to be in during a crisis would be close to the Great Lakes. And they are one of the largest and most consistent sources of fresh water in the world, and they haven't been prone to many natural disasters historically. But no matter where you decide to live, the most important thing is to minimize the risk of being exposed to these disasters. And the next thing to consider is what your shelter is actually made out of. If your area is prone to floods, you need to avoid basements at all costs. More likely than not, your basements are just going to fill up with water during a flood or a hurricane. And additionally, consider living on top of a hill or a curved plot of land so that the water will not pile up right around your house. If your area is prone to fires, you need to make sure that your shelter is made up of fireproof materials like bricks or cement, and that the wood is not directly exposed to the environment. There's a lot more events to account for, but I think you get the idea. And also, you need to make sure that you have a constant source of energy for your home, because power outages are almost guaranteed during extreme weather events. It's okay to be connected to the grid, but having a generator or solar panels will be ideal when the network is overwhelmed, like during a heat wave when air conditioners are going at full blast. No matter where you decide to live, it's very important to have a backup source of fuel in case all else fails. So just remember, in regards to your shelter, location is everything, and make sure you're minimizing the risk of being exposed to a disaster. And finally, always have a backup source of power with you. So we talked about food, water, and shelter, which are the 3 most important things for surviving a climate crisis. But a bonus tip that I have for you, which will make life a whole lot less stressful for you, is to have a reliable network of people that you trust. There's a whole lot that you and I don't know about the climate crisis because it's so unpredictable. But if you know people who have the resources and knowledge that you need, it will very much pay off when things go downhill. So build and maintain a network in your area because you're going to need it. Man, I had to come back in the car because my hands were getting really numb. But those are the 4 major factors to consider during a climate crisis. It's having a reliable access to food, water, shelter, and a network of people that you trust. Now, of course, there's way more factors to consider during a climate crisis, but if you know these 4, you'll be way ahead of the game. And without getting too much off topic, you all know that there's a war going on in Ukraine right now. And when it comes to climate change, I think this war tells us that we still live in a world that's dependent on fossil fuels. And as long as that's the case, I'm not super hopeful about the future. But that doesn't mean you have to suffer from the climate crisis. Holy crap, it is so windy outside that my car is shaking. And if you all will please join me in a moment of silence for the people of Ukraine, that would mean the world to me. Thank you, and may God please keep the people of Ukraine safe. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe down below. I make climate change videos very regularly on this channel, and I know you don't want to miss out on them. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya!